For you, you've mentioned in other interviews that an early TV influence for you was of course Star Trek, and in that time, Gene Roddenberry's universe was more diverse than some of the universes we see on contemporary television. And I know you're also producing an adaptation of Nnedi Okorafor's Who Fears Death, which is exciting for many, many reasons, but one of them, I think, is that people seem to have an increasing hunger for sci-fi and fantasy and speculative fiction that reflects the diversity of our world. Is that something that's important to you or something you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think we have to move in that direction, but I also think science fiction has always done better than the society in general. Not that it's perfect by any means, but the science fiction I like best. There's a lot of kinds of science fiction, There's and fantasy. I mean, besides epic fantasy, there's urban fantasy, there's dark fantasy, there's fairy tales, there's cyberpunk and science fiction. There's space opera. There are many, many kinds of things. The sort of science fiction that I grew up on, that I loved most of all, was the stuff that was set out among the stars, and where we would go to alien planets 100 years in the future, 500 years in the future, and meet aliens, strange life forms, distant suns. It just appealed to me. Maybe it's because that travel thing. I like the exotic flavors and to see sights never seen before, go places no one had ever gone before. What I didn't realize, though, when I was reading that, and I realized it as an adult many, many decades later, is that the we who was going out in those starships in the science fiction that I read in the 50s and 60s, they weren't Americans. They weren't Chinese or Brazilians or French. They were Earthmen or Earthlings or Terrans. Those were the terms that were made. And so if we were going to meet the octopus people of the third planet of Vega, it would be Terrans meeting them, and we would be part of the Solar Alliance or the United Planets or something like that. And some of the authors at the time made a deliberate effort at diversity. Maybe they didn't entirely succeed, but you look at someone like Poul Anderson, and he would have Scotsmen and Irishmen, but also Polynesians and Brazilians. L. Sprague de Camp wrote a whole series in which Brazil was the dominant power of 23rd century Earth. So that message was always there. It was there in the pulp magazines and in the early science fiction. And Gene Roddenberry brought it to television. Roddenberry, the original Star Trek had some good episodes, and it had some really bad episodes, but it was very exciting to see it at the time. And Roddenberry was immensely courageous, if nothing else, and maybe he wasn't the greatest writer to come down the pike or the greatest showrunner, but you look back at the show that came out in 1967, he put a black woman on the bridge as communications engineer. He put an Asian as helmsman. He put a Russian at the height of the Cold War, a Russian on the bridge. He was selling the idea that his federation, Earth, had put together all of its differences and we'd all come together as a single people. And maybe most shocking of all, although, was Spock, because Spock was, you think of Spock as a Vulcan. He wasn't a Vulcan. He was a half-breed. He was half Vulcan, and he was half human. He had green blood and two hearts, and a Vulcan father and a human mother. If you're a hard science fiction writer, this makes no fucking sense. We're not going to... We're not actually going to be able to interbreed with the octopus people of Vega. It doesn't work that way any more than we can, impregnate wombats here on Earth. But nonetheless, what's striking about Spock when this came out in 1967 is the fact that at the time he was doing this, miscegenation was still against the law in half the states in the United States. This was before Loving versus Virginia, which was the famous case recently dramatized in a movie that established that a white man could actually marry a black woman. That was against the law. And interracial marriage, having children with people of another race, and he's having half-breed Vulcans. I mean, it was enormously progressive at the time. And I didn't really notice it because I'd been reading about that stuff for a long time, but looking back on it now and realizing that, books that sell 3,000 copies are one thing, but a television show that reaches 20, 30 million people is another, and these things influence us. They really reflect us. And now, in science fiction fantasy, we are seeing a great upswell of diverse voices by many different sorts of people, different skin colors, different religions, different sexual orientations, and they're producing their own takes on this. And as with any other groups, some of them are good, some of them are not so good, but I think it's a healthy sign for the genre. I do hope that there's still room for some old white guys like me, because I'm.
You can stay. There's room at the table.
Good.
I don't know. There's only 2 seats here, so we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to ask you, I think, 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'm going to go to these fan questions.
Great.
I think my final question will be this. You are a very frequently and many times interviewed person. You've been interviewed a lot. What is the interview question that you wish people would ask? And what is the one that you do not like or that you loathe the most? With apologies to anyone who has previously asked you this question, including me. If I'm one of the people, it's not personal, it's just that I'm asking. So, question you wish people would ask and question you hate the most.
Well, obviously, these days, the question I hate the most is when will Winds of Winter be out? Because I have no good answer for that. I mean, when the day comes that Winds of Winter is done, and I can say, when asked that question, October, that will be a happier time for me. But it's not fun to be asked repeatedly the same question over and over again, and you don't have a good answer for it. There are a lot of questions. I won't say I hate them, but I've been asked them so often that it gets a little tiresome, and it also shows that however much the person may be a huge fan of mine, they've never actually gone online and looked at any of the 137 other interviews from me that you can find on YouTube. I mean, which is your favorite character? Which character you like to write the most? Which character you like to write the least? I've been answering that question since 1996. And there are a number of questions that fall in that category. As to a question that I want to be asked, that's harder. I don't think I have one question. I do like the fact that in your questions you've discussed some things other than Game of Thrones. I mean, I love Game of Thrones. I love Game of Thrones. I love Song of Ice and Fire. But I do have a long history of writing other things, and I'm very happy and proud of some of those things too. And it's fun to discuss things, that I haven't been asked about before. To talk about Fever Dream or Armageddon Reg or the Wildcard series or Dying of the Light or any of my myriad short stories that I've written over the years. So.
Well, good. I'm glad if you hated one of my questions that you're keeping that to yourself for the time being. It's very polite of you.